Talk to Neil Prendeville now. 0818 104 106. Cork's Red FM.
Pick up the phone, text 0868 104 106. A story that makes many of the front pages today, of course, is the man who lay in his bed undiscovered and dead for over 20 years. His skeleton remains were eventually found by county council workers who eventually pushed in the door and got in. There's 180,000 other long-term vacant properties around the country, and the family of the late Tim O'Sullivan say that something has to be done to ensure it doesn't happen again. You have to wonder, are there potentially others in derelict properties undiscovered? I mention that because in September of 2023, just gone, the decomposed body of a man at the age of 66 was found in Youghal in an apartment. He was found in the early hours of the morning at Carey's Wharf in Youghal, an apartment in there, lay undiscovered. 2019, the very sad and tragic story of an 85-year-old man lay dead in his Blackpool home here in Cork for 7 months. In 2022, there was the skeleton remains of a tenant of a council house remained undiscovered for 12 months, despite the fact that 3 visits inside in the property in the intervening period of the 12 months by council staff, they never found the body. So they were in and out 3 times. Skeleton remains were there undiscovered for 12 months. In this year, 2023, August just gone, in Newry, County Down, an elderly couple were found dead inside a house, in and around that time, and they said to have been there for a long time. It doesn't say how long, but it seems to have been some time at least. And then there was the other story of the skeleton remains of a tenant of a council house remained undiscovered for at least a year. And then another one, Britain's Nicholas and Hilary Smith, aged 81 and 79, remained undiscovered at their bungalow in Tipperary. This is from last year. They were undiscovered in the bungalow and been there for 18 months. Their mummified remains of the tragic pair were discovered with all the curtains drawn in their home. Gardaí eventually conducted a welfare search, and they found Nicholas under a quilt in his bed, and Hilary sat upright in the armchair with an electric heater beside her, which was still on, and had been on, I imagine, for a period of 18 months. Awfully sad and tragic stories. But if I could turn to the story from Mallow, and that is to the inquest of Tim O'Sullivan. Barry Roach covered that inquest for the Irish Times, and he joins me by phone. Barry, good morning.
Good morning, Neil. How are you doing?
I'm good. I was just giving a little bit of background there. My apologies for keeping you, because just to show...
No, you're fine. Yeah. There's a lot in this. So what I was going to suggest was maybe if I talk first about how the council found Mr. O'Sullivan. Yeah. And then maybe a bit about what we know about the poor man.
Thank you.
And then the family have made a very strong call, as you referenced, the 180,000 derelict things, so I do that. And then if we have time to just mention some of the other cases that you mentioned there. Yeah. So what we heard yesterday, the inquest was on in Mallow before the coroner from North Cork, Dr. Michael Kennedy, and we heard from John O'Dell of Cork County Council, and he said that he first became aware of issues regarding the house in Beecher Street. Just to put it in context for listeners, Beecher Street in Mallow is if you're heading from Cork to Charleville, Limerick, go through the roundabout, you pass the fire station on your left hand side, Dairy Gold's on your right, you hit another roundabout there, and if you take a right there, it brings you back into the centre of Mallow, and Beecher Street is there. It's across the house. This man's house was a terraced cottage, single storey, across the road from the Mousetrap pub, slightly down from, I think it's a Centre or a Gal, I'm not sure, there's a shop there, it's on that road anyway, and was bordered up. But Mr. O'Dell said that he first became aware of issues regarding the house in Beecher Street in December 2014, when Councillor John Paul O'Shea contacted him about a broken window and asked could the council establish who owned it. He said the council weren't able to establish ownership as it wasn't recorded at the land registry, so the council began treating it as a derelict property, and in January 2015 the property was boarded up by council staff, and he said they had no reason or authority to enter the property when boarding it up. And then he said that about 3 years later there were complaints about vermin from neighbours living next door, so council staff planned to carry out clearance work at the back, but they couldn't gain access to the rear of the property to a garden area. And then he said in January 2023, on foot of more complaints about vermin on the property, council staff went to change the locks on the door at the house January 13th, so Rentaclew could gain access, and that was when Mr. O'Sullivan's remains were discovered.
Yeah, and there was quite some detailed evidence given by council members at the inquest, how they discovered, and the pitch darkness and going in with lights and going through the different rooms, right?
Absolutely. Council employee Paul O'Donoghue, he told how he couldn't really, he was having difficulty basically drilling the lock, so he kicked in the door. He noticed a pile of posts and brochures almost 3/4 of a foot deep inside the door. So he then decided to carry out a sweep or a check of the house. He said, I had a headlamp on me. I saw the bedroom to my left. I could see a bed in the middle of the floor. I then saw a shape of legs under the duvet and a coat laid on top. I worked my way up the legs with the headlamp as my assistant says it was dark, right up to the head. I then realised it was a human body. So he came out and he spoke to his colleagues McCarroll and Eugene Cullinan, asked them to confirm what he'd seen. They confirmed it was a body and they notified Gardaí and they arrived at the scene, cordoned it off. And we heard then from Garda Siobhan Costello how she'd arrived there with her colleague, Garda Megan Murphy. They confirmed there were human remains. They notified Garda technical experts and preserved the scene. And at 2:18 p.m. on the 13th of January, local GP Dr. Marion O'Donovan pronounced the person dead. So that was, as I say, it was clear. The person was deceased. We also heard
she confirmed there was no sign of trauma or foul play.
Well, Dr. Bolster later did that then. But Sergeant Eileen Kelly told the inquest she carried out an examination of documents found in the house after the remains removed. She found a passport, a birth cert, driving licence, as well as an ESP bill, all in the name of Timothy O'Sullivan, together with the cash equivalent of €8,000. Now, I'm not sure, was this
I think it was £8,000
or I'm not sure was it punts or possibly sterling, but it was equivalent of €8,000 at any rate. She also found a diary entry, she said, in which Mr. O'Sullivan said he was going to Tesco's on January the 9th, 2001 for the first time. Now, I'm not sure if Tesco's was it that he was going there for the first time or Tesco's had just arrived in Mallow. But she also found a receipt from Tesco on that date confirming the visit, and she found a social welfare card also in the name of Timothy O'Sullivan. So she contacted the Department of Social Protection. They were able to confirm that he was in receipt of job seekers allowance from October the 4th, 2000 to January 23rd, 2001, when the claim closed automatically as he had failed to collect 3 payments in a row. So that would all point towards he was alive up until January 9th, 23rd, that period. We heard from 2001, we heard from his sister Maureen that she had never visited him in Beecher Street after he moved from the UK to Mallow, but she used to write to him and he used to reply with the letter stopped around 1982, and she presumed he'd moved back to the UK. We also heard a statement from his other sister, Noreen Foster. She lives in Australia. She told how she called to the house in Mallow on a visit back to Ireland on July the 24th, 2003. She received no answer, and when she knocked, she looked in the window and appeared nobody had been living there for a while. She spoke to neighbours who said they hadn't seen him since Christmas, and they thought he'd gone to the UK, and she called the Mallow Garda station where she met a Garda who told her he knew her brother but presumed he'd gone to the UK because he knew that Mr. O'Sullivan had another brother living there. And she said, I remember phoning the Garda a week later and we caught him on the golf course. He did not provide any further information about Tim, and again he just said he believed Tim had gone back to the UK and he left it there.
But she did say, I always presumed that the Gardaí had actually taken some action to investigate, isn't it?
She did, yes, and before coming to their conclusion, she said she'd expected they'd gone into the house, but obviously they didn't. We heard, as you say, from Dr. Bolster. We also heard from a statement from a consultant dentist who examined dental records, and that's how they confirmed that the remains were those of Mr. O'Sullivan. Dr. Bolster said the bones were quite desiccated, but there was no sign of any fracture or trauma like that, but they were so desiccated that death suggested he was dead a long time, so long in fact that she wasn't able to determine the cause of death. Dr. Kennedy, the coroner, then said, it was a hugely distressing case for the family, but if it was of any comfort to them, the fact Dr. Bolster could find no trauma or any evidence of injury, and the fact that the cash was there in the house undisturbed, and the fact that he was found lying on the bed with the duvet in his overcoat on top of the duvet suggested that he'd passed away asleep peacefully in the bed sometime, he said, between January the 9th and 23rd, 2001.
At the age of 62?
At the age of 61, and he extended his sympathies to the family. And so that was, he also promised to pass on their statement calling for a review of legislation to the relevant government departments. Hugely distressing case, as you say, Neil, and I suppose the picture we have of Tim O'Sullivan, the family were obviously very private and didn't want to speak, so the picture we have really of him that's emerged has been from a few statements that they've issued at various stages. He was born, we discovered, in Carsaveen in on the 29th of September 1939, a few weeks after the First World War. The Second World War started, and I started placing this in my own mind. John Lennon was born in December 1940, so he'd have been a year older than John Lennon, so I presume the 60s would have been when he was in his heyday, as it were. We understood he worked as a compositor in printed works in the UK, and the family described him as a bright, intelligent and able man who came to Kerry often as holidays with his wife. His sister moved back. His siblings were all born in the UK. The family his parents had emigrated soon after he was born in 1939 to the UK, and his siblings were born there. One of them moved back to South Kerry, Maureen, and she said Tim used to come over to Ireland on a holiday and stay with my mum, and where my mum and dad are from. Not long before my mum passed away in January 1990, Tim moved over to Ireland. He was married when he moved to Ireland, and he was late getting married. We understand the marriage didn't last, and there was a lot of coverage obviously at the time when the body was discovered, and a lot of media reports were that Tim had struggled with mental health, but the family said that wasn't the case. Reports have been made in the media in recent days that, this is back in January, that Tim struggled with his mental health, but really it was more a case of a man with a broken heart who wished for privacy and time to be alone.
That's awfully sad.
It's desperately sad, isn't it?
And you know something, reading all of the copy and reading the inquest reports and everything, I feel very sorry for the family, because they didn't know that Tim owned the property. You can't, they thought it was rented, they thought he'd gone back to the UK, they talked to neighbours, they went into the local pub, they went to the Gardaí. They couldn't break down the door because they had assumed he was gone, didn't know that he actually owned it, and probably were assured that he was, just tipping away in the UK and that all was okay. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's the point they made in their statement yesterday to the coroner. It was read by a solicitor, Fiona O'Sullivan, but on behalf of Mr. O'Sullivan's nephew, Aidan, and he said, that the family acknowledged that they could have done more to locate him.
But I wonder, could they? I mean, they're cut up enough. They must feel awful guilt, but we have to give some compassion to them, really, don't we?
Yeah, but they also made the point that they believed on Garda Síochána and Cork County Council could have shown more care and due diligence in the matter. And Aidan Shine in a statement said, the decision to board up the house without conducting internal checks highlights one of the main shortcomings in the current derelict property processes and surely conceal the truth about our brother's whereabouts for even longer. We do not seek to lay blame, but rather to emphasise to all parties involved that more could have been done. Moreover, they say, we are deeply concerned that his tragedy may not be an isolated case in a nation with over, as you say, 180,000 derelict properties. We worry that similar cases could remain hidden. And they went on to say then the existing system and processes seem inadequate. Sending notification letters to derelict houses, erecting a notice and waiting extended periods, often exceeding 12 months before commencing compulsory purchase order process, is an impediment to timely intervention. And that point you made about them being unable to establish, or weren't able to find out that Tim actually owned the house. Yeah. The fact that local authorities appear not to have the authority to conduct the necessary legal searches in both the Registry of Deeds and Land Registry to determine the owner of our property and carry out subsequent searches to contact next of kin before beginning a compulsory purchase order, that also is a deficiency, they say. And they said, we appeal to this coroner's court and humbly request a comprehensive review of the legislation surrounding derelict properties and the CPO procedure in Ireland. We advocate for a more compassionate, efficient and proactive system to prevent future events of this nature.
100% right. I mean, I'm getting texts already saying, and just as a typical one, it should never have been boarded up without checking the inside first. There's a bit of common sense, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I'm just looking here, I was doing a bit of research before we came on there. Derelict Cork campaigners, Frank O'Connor and Jude Cherry, they estimated, I think, in June this year, there were 460 vacant and derelict buildings located within a 2-kilometre radius of Cork city centre. And it's a slightly different context now, but I'll just refer to it in that the poor man was the victim of murder, Frankie Dunn, if you remember back. Yeah. But that was at a derelict property, and if it wasn't for Joe Pearce looking for his cat in the grounds there,
Borry Manor,
Borry Manor Road, who knows what, we still might be issuing appeals, or the family might still be issuing appeals for Frankie Dunn. So it's a serious issue, and you've listed cases there. Earlier, the man in Youghal, I hadn't included that, but I mean, we had the 2 in Cork City that, no, they weren't derelict properties, but they were there for a number of years. Richie Scanlon in Madden's Buildings, he was there, I think.
He was there
over 6 months. George Harrington in the Glen, he could have been there. I'm just looking here for months again. We had the Smiths of Clooney, as you say, 18 months in Tipperary, and there were a few more that you referred to, and I'm looking at one. The one that was most similar in some respects to this is the case of Michael Whiston, a man in Dublin, Sallynoggin Road in Dunleary. February 2022, his mummified remains were found. He was a 76-year-old man living alone. The house had been evacuated just hours earlier after a hand grenade from the Civil War was found in a frying pan in the kitchen. It was made safe by bomb disposal experts. Council staff then went in to clear rubbish, which they believe was in the abandoned property.
That's bizarre.
And we heard, the inquest in Dublin heard from a council official, Carmel Donlan, said they had been contacted in January 11, 2021 by a neighbour concerned that Mr. Whiston hadn't been seen since Christmas. They checked with neighbours, he said, RIP.ie, local nursing homes, social welfare workers, as well as calling the property over the following months, and no rent had been paid since January 20th, 21. So they started a process to deem the house abandoned. Workers from a security firm called to it on October the 8th, 2021. That's 10 months later, nearly 9 months later. They replaced a door there. It was inspected by council staff, accompanied by Gardaí on October the 15th, 2021. 3 days later, they attached a note notifying the tenant that they intended to terminate the tenancy. And then it was February 2022 when when an employee of the company sent in to clear rubbish from the house. They found the poor man's remains, skeletal remains, sitting up on a bed in the back bedroom.
Isn't that bizarre?
And they had to get DNA samples to confirm his identity. They heard, or the inquest heard, he was a single man, no history of employment, recluse, rarely left the house, agoraphobic, fear of open spaces, and he also suffered from alcoholism and suffered from depression, and he'd lived there alone since his mother died in 2008. But again,
people have been going in and out and never spotted the body.
Yeah, it's extra. Yeah, and I mean there were two cases in Wexford I've come across. There's a really bizarre one in Mayo when the family were living in the house. The sister, if you remember that, the elderly sister died, and the brother wasn't meeting them. They were leaving notes from, and about a year later he discovered she was dead. There's some really strange ones, but the scary thing is if there are 180,000 derelict properties.
With the job seekers allowance, okay, so the job seekers allowance, maybe that's how they're able to date it.
That's how we're able to date it.
The receipt for job seekers would have been January 23, 2001. You're saying that it's cut off then after you don't pick it up after 3 weeks. But nobody checks on a job seeker not picking up the allowance. But would they check on a pension or not picking up a pension?
Speaking to you before, I think you had Paddy O'Brien on afterwards. He made a very sensible suggestion that, if somebody doesn't collect a pension or a social welfare payment, or a couple of them consecutively, and they fail to collect, then some red flags should come up in the system and say, hang on a second, what's happening here?
Yes.
And somebody go and check out. There's no point in writing out to somebody who's dead, living alone, a letter that nobody's going to find.
Well, the thing you do straight away is you would, as you said, check RIP.ie. There's nothing in there then, and someone hasn't collected a pension, then you up the investigation to another stage.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Paddy O'Brien's suggestion that time was eminently sensible and practical, and it should be easy to do. I would have thought with computer systems that you would have some red flag and alert coming on saying the person hasn't collected this in a month, what's the story here, and a check. But I mean, there I've come across and I wasn't aware of the one in you had from New Reno, that couple. But I mean, there's some, there's elderly two sisters in Mitchelstown back in 97. They were dead possibly 2 or 3 weeks. I'd say the one from Ballyhaunis, the woman who'd been dead a year, and she was sharing a room with her sister who obviously wasn't mentally well. Alan Moore in Wexford dead 3 months. Christmas lights in the window alerted people around March. People noticed the Christmas lights. That's when the guards went in. A man called Philip Knight in Wexford again. Neighbours noticed a foul smell. They went in. He'd been dead about a month or so. And then the Michael Whiston one in Dublin. But it's
20
sad.
years though.
But 20 years is just it's incredible when you think of it. I mean, 22 years. I go to Mallow. That's how I go up to the courthouse in Mallow. I've been passing that house for I don't know how many times. So many people have passed it, never realising that there was a poor man in there.
And nobody ever thought about going in and checking the property. Hopefully, some good will come from this awful, awful tragedy.
Hopefully, I mean, if properties are being boarded up, surely it should common sense. Okay, there may be an issue about authority, but surely people can get some permission. The authorities can go and get permission to go and carry out one sweep of the place to make sure there's nobody in there,
Yeah, but even at that, though, there shouldn't be a legal impediment to checking whether somebody is all right or not, I would think,
Yeah, or get the Gardaí to go in with you before you board her up.
Oh, totally.
Like that,
Totally.
Yeah.
Barry, thank you so much for that. As always, an awful lot of detail there from Barry Rhodes, Southern correspondent with the Irish Times, on the late Timothy O'Sullivan, and I think it's fair to say our thoughts are with his extended family. It's a difficult time, and it must have been hard to give evidence yesterday, and indeed to hear an awful lot of the evidence that was given about their beloved brother. Lines are open. Text 0868 104 106. Back after the break.
The number one talk show in Cork.
If it's happening in Cork, Neil is talking about it.
The Neil Prendeville Show on Red FM.
What if we started again?